Yeah, it's one of the most basic concepts covered in the middle school life science program, as well as in high school in biology. You have to talk about mitosis and meiosis. It's one of the most basic concepts.
Nice.
So we're going to spend the day talking about cell division today.
Great. Cell cells and more cells.
Cells and more cells. That's right. When they divide, we get more cells. Okay. As I was saying, one of the most basic concepts covered in middle school life science is the concept of cell division. And also in 9th grade biology, we cover cell division. So today we're going to talk about the two types of cell division, the differences between them, and we're going to do a comparison so you really can understand what's happening when the cells are dividing. And we're going to start off with a little PowerPoint presentation and go over first the most simple of the cell divisions, which is mitosis. So on our PowerPoint presentation, first I want to talk about the state standard that we are going to address. And the state standard is all living organisms are composed of cells from just 1 to many trillions, whose details are usually only visible through a microscope. As a basis for understanding this concept, students will know that for mitosis, which is standard 1E, cells divide to increase their number through a process of mitosis, which results in two daughter cells with identical sets of chromosomes. Okay? And before I go on with the rest of my PowerPoint presentation, I want to point out a couple vocabulary words I have up here on the board and talk about what a normal cell is and what we're beginning with and what we're going to end up with. Okay? Actually, right here I have a picture of a normal cell, a cell that has not undergone any division at all. And you'll notice that there are two pair of chromosomes. There are two red chromosomes and there are two blue chromosomes. If you remember that you get your chromosomes, one from your father and one from your mother. That's why there's always in pairs. When the chromosomes are in a pair, it's called diploid. So a cell that contains two sets of chromosomes, one set inherited from each parent, is called a diploid cell. And we're starting off with the diploid cell before we go into mitosis. Okay? And on our PowerPoint presentation, we're going to show you the stages of mitosis and what happens to those chromosomes and the cell. Okay, the first stage of mitosis is called interphase. And during that stage, the cell grows to its mature size, makes a copy of its DNA, and prepares to divide into two cells. If you take a close look at the picture, the chromosomes are not visible yet. They're duplicating. They're going to form in the next step. There are two chromosomes, one from each parent, and they are duplicating during this stage. The second stage, which is right next to mitosis, to interphase, if we could just move over just a little bit, is called prophase. The chromatin are actually formed, they condense to form chromosomes. Structures called spindle fibers form a bridge between the ends of the cell, and the nuclear membrane breaks down. If we look at this cell, we'll notice that the chromosomes have duplicated. The red cell, the red chromosome, now has two pair. It's a copy of itself. The blue chromosome has a pair, so we have a red chromosome with a copy, a blue chromosome with a copy, a red chromosome with a copy, and another blue chromosome with a copy. So we still have two pair of chromosomes, but they have copies of each other. That's very important. It's the first stage before the cell can start dividing. The third stage is when the chromosomes line up. And the chromosomes will line up in a straight line. So all the chromosomes have lined up in a straight line, and they are attached by spindle fibers. And it looks like a basketball with little strings attached to the very center. And what happens next is exactly what you think is going to happen. The cell begins to divide. The spindle fibers attach to the chromosomes, and the chromosomes are pulled apart. And in this instance, what is happening is that the pairs that have duplicated are separated from each other. It's not one pair gets separated from the other pair, but the copies get pulled apart from each other. So this is the original chromosome possibly, and this is its copy. Original copy, original copy, original copy. That might not be exactly the way it works. They could be mixed up, but the main point is that the copies and the originals are being pulled apart. And that's the most important concept at this point of cell division. Finally, after this happens, we end up with two daughter cells, which have exactly the same number of chromosomes as the mother cell. And I want to go over that process again in a little more detail with some bigger pictures here, and we'll talk about that again. And we'll talk about some of these vocabulary words as well. So this process is mitosis. One copy of DNA is distributed into each of the two daughter cells. Okay? During mitosis, one copy of the DNA is distributed into the two daughter cells. So if we start going through this process on the board here, we look again at our original cell. Original cells with the four chromosomes, 2 pair of red, 2 pair of blue, and then the next stage, we see that we have the copies are made. We have the red chromosome with its copy, the blue chromosome with its copy, and also the other blue chromosome and the red chromosome with its copy. So we can see what's going to happen. The chromosomes line up. Chromosomes line up and are attached by spindle fibers, and they are separated. And during mitosis, cell division, the cell then forms two daughter cells. And if we look at the daughter cells, I'm going to pull one of my daughter cells off the board here, and we're going to compare it to the parent cell. They're exactly the same. 2 pair of chromosomes for each cell. Now, that seems pretty basic and simple, but when we get into meiosis, it gets a little more complicated. But the main concept I want you to understand, and remember, it's very important that mitosis makes 2 cells that are exactly the same. What kind of cells would you want that would be exactly the same? For example, if you have some skin cells that were dying or you're growing some more hair, you want the cells to be exactly the same. So this is a way of replacing cells that have been damaged or worn out or to grow new cells. So mitosis is responsible for that part. It's responsible for growth. It's responsible for replacing cells that have been damaged. Okay? Now, the second type of cell division is called meiosis. And also, I need to make a point. There's a misconception that a lot of students have, and they think that mitosis is cell division. And people think that meiosis is also cell division. Those are just steps to 2 different types of cell division. Those are the middle parts of cell division. The very first part of cell division occurs, it's called interphase. It is the same in both mitosis and in meiosis. The chromosomes have to duplicate themselves. So the first stage is interphase for both mitosis and meiosis. So at that point, mitosis and meiosis are exactly the same. Okay? But meiosis produces a different kind of cell. It does not reproduce exact duplicates. And if we're going to look at the PowerPoint again, we have a definition of what meiosis is, I believe. The process by which the number of chromosomes is reduced by half to form gametes, a new vocabulary word, which are also called sex cells. Oh, got your attention, said the sex word. Got those junior high school kids' attention. And those are also eggs and sperm. And if we're dealing with plants, it's also pollen. So plants also do reproduce sexually. And using the process of meiosis, the sex cells are formed. As I was saying, the first stage of meiosis is the same as in mitosis. The chromosomes are duplicating. Okay? But we will notice a difference. The difference is in the way the chromosomes line up. And this time, the chromosomes are lined up by pairs. And I think if we look at the board, we'll get a better picture of this, and we might just leave the PowerPoint behind for now. Look at the difference between the way the chromosomes are lined up in mitosis. All 4 chromosomes are lined up across the equator. And when they get separated, this little spindle thing holding them together splits, and the copy is separated from the original. But look at the way they're lined up for meiosis. For meiosis, the pairs of chromosomes are next to each other, and what is going to happen is that one pair gets separated from the other pair. During mitosis, the copies get separated. During meiosis, the pairs of chromosomes get separated. And that is the key difference. And that is where this next vocabulary word comes in. If you remember our diploid cell, a cell contains 2 sets of chromosomes, one inherited from each parent. A normal cell is diploid. A new vocabulary word, haploid, a cell that only contains 1 set of chromosomes. Okay? 1 set of chromosomes, haploid. When these cells start dividing and the pairs of chromosomes are separated, at this point, It may look like there's 2 red chromosomes and 2 blue chromosomes, but this is a red chromosome with its copy, and this is a blue chromosome with its copy. And the pair of the blue one is opposite. The pairs are being separated. So you might say that the chromosomes for the mother going one way, chromosomes for father going the other way. That's not exactly the way it works, but that's a good concept for you to understand. It's easier to put it into those terms. So when when meiosis finishes its first cell division, we end up with 2 cells that are not exactly the same as our first cell because they only have 1 blue chromosome and 1 red chromosome and a copy of each. So at this point, we actually have 2 haploid cells. They are not diploid anymore. So in the first stage of division in meiosis, you end up with a cell with half the number of chromosomes. You still have an extra copy, though. So that's what meiosis goes through a second division. The second cell division takes the copies of those chromosomes and separates them. So now the copies are being separated, and what we end up with are 4 sex cells. Yes, I said the sex word. Sex cells that have only half the number of chromosomes. It has 1 red chromosome, 1 blue chromosome, and they all have 1 red chromosome and 1 blue chromosome. And that's very important. The very important part that you really need to understand where the difference is when the chromosomes line up during the first stage of cell division. And using these words, again, I want to go back over this one more time, make sure that you understand the difference between mitosis and meiosis. Starting off with a regular cell. What kind of cell? What kind of cell is it? How many chromosomes does it have? It has 2 pairs of chromosomes, therefore it is a diploid cell. It contains a pair of chromosomes, 1 from each parent. During mitosis, all of the chromosomes line up on the equator. They line up on the equator, and during mitosis, the copies are separated from each other. Therefore, each cell is getting 1 red-blue chromosome, 2 red chromosomes, 2 blue chromosomes. So we end up with daughter cells that are diploid. They have the same number. They have 2 pairs of chromosomes and are exact duplicates of the mother. Mitosis produces two daughter cells that are the same as the parent cell. Meiosis, on the other hand, starts off with a diploid cell. The chromosomes duplicate in the nucleus. They line up, but they line up totally different than the cells do in mitosis. They line up so that the actual pairs of chromosomes are separated. And during the first cell division, we end up with a cell that is haploid. It only has half the number of chromosomes. So we have 2 cells that have half the number of chromosomes going through a second cell division. Our haploid cell then produces what are called gametes, the sex cells. And the sex cells then each only have 1 chromosome each. And why do you think it's important to have sex cells that only have 1 chromosome each? What do you think would happen if the sex cells had the normal number of chromosomes? Well, let's kind of do a little genetics here on the board and think about that. Okay? We start off with a cell that, for example, let's say T stands for a tall cell. It's dominant. So you need 2 letters. As we said, 2 chromosomes. You need 1 from your parent, 1 from your mother. That represents how tall you are. T is for capital T, dominant, for a tall, small t, recessive, for short. Sex cells are formed. So we would have 1 sex cell with a capital T, 1 sex cell with a small t. Okay? This could be from your father, this could be from your mother. Same thing would happen. What would happen if all the sex cells had 2 chromosomes? What would happen when a sperm and egg unite? We would end up with 4 T's instead of 2. And we would have a bunch of mutants running around that would be tall, short, we don't know. But the process of meiosis is for sexual reproduction. Parents produce babies by sharing their chromosomes. Half of the information comes from your mother, half of your information comes from your father. So the process of meiosis that allows this to happen. And, excuse me, there is a geneticist by the name of Gregor Mendel who came up with a way of studying probability of what's going to happen to the chromosomes. And when they divide, what will the characteristics of the plants or animals look like? And Gregor Mendel was a monk who studied plants. And he came up with the laws of heredity. And he came up with these laws of heredity before anybody ever saw the chromosomes. He came up with this by doing good scientific observations. He picked some true breeding plants, and he looked at their characteristics, and he did some crossbreeding. And there's a new word I just threw out to you, true breeding. That means that, for example, if he was studying pea plants that produced purple flowers, every time a purple male flower and a purple female flower were crossed, they produced purple flowers. So we might think of their genotype, which is another new word. What type of genes do we have? And we're going to talk about that in more detail next week. And I need a little more room on the board here, so I'm just going to remove some of my cells. A true breeding plant would be a plant that is double dominant or has the same chromosomes in itself, so that all of its sex cells would be a capital T, if this was its chromosome. That is a true breeding plant. If this was a male or a female, it wouldn't matter. All of its sex cells would be a dominant T, so all the babies would be tall. Okay? He discovered that when it's true breeding, this will happen. He discovered, well, actually, if we do what's called a Punnett square, what he's discovered is if we have a male who is double dominant and a female, for example, who is hybrid, one of each, he figured out a way of figuring out the probability of what the babies are going to look like. What you do is you take the gametes, the sex cells have to divide through this process of meiosis and produce one sex cell with a capital T for the father, another capital T, another sperm may have the capital T, and the egg cells go on the side here. And when you do your cross, what you do is these two T's will meet in this box. One possible baby from these two parents could be double dominant. They would get a big T from one parent and a big T from the other parent. These two T's also meet in this box. These two T's meet in this box, and these two T's meet in this box. So by simple mathematics and looking at good scientific observations, Gregor Mendel discovered the laws of heredity and figured out that all the possible combinations of how plants reproduce and how genetics affects offspring. And this was before we ever discovered meiosis. So this actually confirms what happens to the chromosomes during cell division, that they are divided, they are separated, and the parents then share, the chromosomes are shared through the offspring, and there are shared characteristics. Okay? And next week when we get into more genetics, we're going to talk about more about some genetic information that you have and that your family has. We'll talk about pedigrees and some of those characteristics. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say that's very fascinating. The
cell division?
Yeah,
well, we have a pair of
good.
twins here. I mean, next week when we talk about genetics, we can talk about twins. And that's one of the first questions kids always ask me. How do twins happen? What happens to them? And so we're going to save that for next week.
Twins are special.
Twins are very special.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
John. Thank you. And now it's time for math here with Tom Ring. We're talking